On November 17th, 2025, Shadows Upon Time, the seventh and final book in the Sonata series by Christopher Rocco, finally drops. This is the story of a man who destroyed the sun at the behest of a god, the one true God. And listen, there hasn't been a single person I've recommended this series to who didn't come back absolutely screaming in glee. So if you're wondering what all the noise is about, strap in for the ride of your existence because I'm going to take you through all 6 books of Sonita and tell you all you need to know. Here's how I'll do it. I'll cover the first 2 books in a bit of detail, just so we have some foundation. Then I'll compress the rest, giving just show overviews, so you know enough to want to read the book, but nowhere near enough that it will be spoiled. There will of course be light spoilers, but nothing that will ruin the experience. But if even a tiny bit is too much for you, hit the like, subscribe, and then jet. Thank you. You have been warned. Let us begin. Now, the novel is presented as a first-person memoir by Hadrian Marlowe. Looking across his long life, he begins telling the reader, us, that he is remembered both as the hero and the monster, the man who destroyed the sun, who wiped out billions in a war against the alien race known as the Seelson, and yet also the man who fought for a cause not of his own choosing. The setting is far future human empire, the Solar Empire, in which humanity at this point has conquered many worlds. The social structure is feudal and of course religious. There are powerful noble classes. There's a dominant religion order called the Chantry, which enforces ideological conformity. And then there are alien species largely subjugated as Rey. Hadrian Marlowe was born into one of the noble houses of the Solar Empire on the planet Delos as the eldest son of Lord Alistair. Marlowe, Archon of the Prefecture of Medulla, he also boasts being a distant relative of the Emperor. He's essentially genteelly engineered, raised among the aristocracy, and so essentially he's called a Palatine. But he never quite felt the ease of belonging. His younger brother, however, Crispin, does. He's his father's golden boy. Now, golden might be the wrong word because Crispin is also a little shithead and a complete daddy's boy. Sure, he's taller, he's broader, he's stronger, I guess, but somehow he still manages to get his ass under to him every time he and Hadrian fight. But moving on, within his family's castle, which is known as Devil's Rest, Hadrian sits at the table of power, but remains an outsider of sorts. His father oversees the uranium mines, political alliances, and the quasi-religious strength of the Marlowe name within the empire. Hadrian, by contrast, however, finds himself often drawn more to languages, to philosophy, to the role of a scholiast, right? The scholarly order, rather than the life of a noble warrior. Essentially, Hadrian was made to be a ruthless overlord, but then he turns around and becomes a scholar, or rather, towards being a scholar. This was, of course, in part due to the influence of his teacher, Tor Gibson, a scholiast who taught him quite a lot about matters of literacy, philosophy, and the likes. Now, the table scene is one scene in the book which is particularly telling. So what happens here is that Crispin is bluntly asking, they have a group of guests around, and Crispin is bluntly asking whether they also eat people, despite the decorum of the garden. Now, Hadrian must confirm, and the dignitaries are surprised at how much Hadrian seems to know about the Seelson. This does earlier on establish to us, the reader, the gulf between Hadrian's mind and his family's expectations. Now, growing uneasy with the path laid out before him, one of a, to be honest, brutal inheritance, possibly torture and cloned hair and domination and suppression, Hadrian attempts to flee from his father. But this is not before his father basically disinherits him and wants to send him off to the Chantry, which is the religious organization with the knack for killing people we mentioned before, as a torturer. So he does try to get off planet, and he's helped by an unlikely ally. So essentially he goes into cryosleep because cryosleep is needed for these long travels, these long voyages, and he expects to wake up to a scholar's paradise when BAM! He ends up on a remote backwater world called Imesh, stranded, alone, cut off from his family, his name, and his future. Now on Imesh, he lives as a low status individual. He learns to survive on the street, to beg, to fight when necessary. Essentially, his aristocratic trainings and memories recedes to the background of his mind. Eventually, he enters the arena of the Colossal, essentially gladiatorial pit, as a myrmidon, essentially an enslaved fighter, right? He meets others, and one of those companions is Twitch, a fellow myrmidon, whose friendship becomes meaningful even as Hadrian's identity and origin stresses to undermine it. Through the arena, through the low-life and underground culture, he finds a new life of danger, of solidarity, and the raw survival far removed from the courtly life he was used to back on his planet. Not to say he didn't have his fair of brutal encounters, but this was one that wasn't in a controlled environment. But then comes his first encounter with the Sealson. Now, what happens is that, as at this point, rumors spread of a captured alien kept in the Colossus dungeons. Hadrian, as expected, you will soon see, ever the scholar, can't resist, so he sneaks down there, desperate to see one up close. And what he finds changes everything. The Sealson aren't the mindless monsters propaganda promised. They are cold, they are terrifying, or certainly inhuman, but they're intelligent, and this particular one is ancient and wounded. Naturally, things go wrong. I mean, it's Hadrian. What do you expect? He's captured, and eventually, the long story short is that he finds himself in the service of Count Belian, the local noble on Emesh. So, under Belian's rule, he claws his way back into civilization. He becomes a tutor. He meets the brilliant and skeptical Dr. Valkander, and don't worry, the laugh in my voice should tell you everything. She's essentially a xenologist obsessed with the alien runes. And together they dive headfirst into the web of politics, of mystery, and of rediscovery. Now, through this stage, he learns of the ancient alien ruins, right? The quiet and their left behind Blackstone sites. Now, this is important, keep this in mind. He makes contact with Sealson crash survivors and he becomes their translator of sorts. Hadrian realizes that the Sealson worship a predecessor race called the Quiet, at least how he thinks, and that humans are not the only players in this galactic game. Now, keep in mind that Hadrian can't speak the Sealson language. The book does focus on his interaction with the Sealson and their relationship with humans, specifically why they're going on the world models, because at this point, the Sealson are just going up around, raiding planets, killing humans everywhere they can, and no one seems to be able to get them to negotiate for Jackal. A few things you will notice is that Hadrian is kind of a big hypocrite, and he's also a scholar and has a deep thirst for knowledge. Now, this is important because, especially with information regarding the Sealson, he often uses both the Sealson captives and the humans in this pursuit. I mean, sure, he says he's doing all this in hopes or attempts for peace, but as you soon see, peace is often the second thing on Hadrian's mind. The first is the acquisition of knowledge. Keep this in mind because you will see this pop up several times, as I said before. Hadrian is often very self-centered. He has blinders on. When he wants something, he goes and gets it. Despite the moral justification he offers, they are pretty much shit. It's important to know that Hadrian is also an unreliable narrator. By the end of the book, he's commissioned to lead his own ship, pick his crew, and embark on a journey that will set him straight into the galactic conflict. Now, he definitely thinks that this is some sort of scientific excursion. Boy, oh boy, was he wrong, and in no small way at that. Now, in Book 2, The Howling Dark, we see Hadrian returning to consciousness after a long fugue. He's aboard the Red Company, his ship, and we're introducing some of the familiar characters of his company. We have Basander Lane, we have Jinan Azhar, we have Switch, we have Valkandera, and this book centers around the hunt for Vogosus. Now, the mission and the extrasolarians. The Red Company's objective, and keep in mind the Red Company is the ship, is not a conventional battle, but rather it's a quest to find Vogosos, a lost and hidden world associated with the Exalted or the Extrasolarians, and contacts with their technology that might let humans reach or parley with the Sealson. Now, to do that, the company must deal with some lawless liminal people between the stars, which are called the Extrasolarians. Essentially, they are, for lack of a better word, augmented humans, to put it simple, right? And Hadrian and his officers, they tend to navigate these shady brokers, the bone cutters, magentas, and a web of illicit contacts in a backspace in order to obtain passage and leads. Now, the company eventually boards a much larger envoy ship called the Enigma of Hours and is guided by strange and sometimes hostile artifices towards Vogosos. Long story short, they do get to Vogosos and it shit starts to get crazy, Plot Infinite. Now, so essentially speaking, as Hadrian gets to Vogosos, we get encounters with the Extrasolarians, with Kansagara, with the Bedouin, with the Quiet, right? We see diplomacy, betrayal, and blood. And Hadrian eventually gets caught up in an encounter that brings him face to face with Sealson leadership and sets in motion larger strategic events. The Sealson are shown to be not merely as rapacious monsters as previously thought. We see that they have very, very well organized structures and hierarchy, and they might be tied to the quiet in their own existential motivations. Right now, Hangel's language, skills, and curiosity lets him cross the gulf that others simply cannot. But every contact deepens his culpability. Knowledge arrives often at the cost of his friends, and this increases his sort of responsibilities for future catastrophes. You can kind of start to see the setup to how he creates the monster he becomes here. Now, Hitler attempts diplomacy and parley repeatedly, but he keeps meeting with treachery. The Red Company fractures, we see betrayals, we see political machinations that break up the unity, people die in skirmishes and in large set pieces. Hadrian is severely wounded in the later battle, and I will be leaving out a lot of information about this conflict. If you notice, I'm like circling around it, but this is intentional because I don't want to get into too much details. One of the key events I will tell you about in this book is that Hadrian has his first major encounter with the Quiet, the god who would later order him to alienate an entire alien race. Hadrian here dons the name of Half Mortal after his skirmish with one of the Seleucid princes. This is where Hadrian the Myth is born. Now, we're going to join from Book 4 to Book 6. So as promised, I'll compress this part. By the time we reach Demon in White, the third book, Hadrian Malo is no longer the naive scholar who dreamed of understanding the Seleucid. He's a legend in the making. He's a soldier, a monster, and the Emperor's reluctant sword. But beneath the shining armor he dons, Hadrian is haunted by memories and visions. In this book, Hadrian becomes a symbol of resurrection, literally and metaphorically. Powers and his legends began to consume him as he ascends politically and spiritually. The empire glorifies him, but Hadrian starts to see the cracks, the corruption, the stagnation, the fear of truth. It's here that the political dance begins in earnest. Now, some fear Hadrian, others hail him, and everybody wants to use him. In case you've missed it, Hadrian is a hunter and Caron. When we say he's smart, I mean scholarly kind of smart, but he sucks at understanding politics, and he's very brash. The battles he's used to fighting are not the ones he fights here, and quite frankly, he gets his ass handed to him back to back. Then comes Kingdoms of Death, the emotional Nadir. Captured by the Seleucid, Hadrian descends into horror. Like, this book it's just torture. The complete humiliation and degradation of Hadrian. What we see is both a psychological and spiritual annihilation. Hadrian here is stripped, humiliated, tormented, and to be honest, it feels like watching the Passion of the Christ. This is the crucible of his myth. This is where Hadrian comes to really hate the Seleucid. Every ounce of compassion is burned away, leaving behind the kind of man who would burn an entire race to the ground at the behest of a god. By Ashes of Man, Hadrian is a broken saint walking amongst ghosts of the people he loves. The Empire sees him as a god figure, but he's hollowed out. He's trying to reconcile what's left of his soul. The narrative shoots from the galactic war to moral dilemmas. I won't touch much on this book because, again, avoiding spoilers, but you would love this and see for yourself. And then we go to Disquiet Gods. The saga turns inwards and upwards, and I mean, here we get all the big reveals. Hadrian goes from half mortal to quite literally Space Jesus. And when I say Space Jesus, Hadrian does the most Space Jesus of all things Space Jesus. This is the most Space Jesus of every Space Jesus that's ever existed. I'm confusing now. I know, but there is no greater Space Jesus moment than that moment. And when you get to that moment in the book, you will know the moment I'm talking of. And I'm not exaggerating. We actually see the Seleucid gods. We get the law behind them. We get the law behind everything, the quiet included. And this is scene, again, the scene I want to talk about. Oh, bloody much. But I want you guys to experience it by yourself firsthand, so I will say nothing. And then we have Shadows Upon Time. And boy, I am excited. I can barely sit still. Like, I can't wait till it comes out. Please drop a like. Feel free to ask me questions and argue in the comments. And until next time, remember, this must be.